This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rapin. Joining me this week for episode 324, two pro solar mechanics in training, Paul Jasley.
Hello, humanoids.
And Nick White.
I get that reference.
We're all Love and Rockets aficionados here on the podcast. I think Paul is our, main Jedi master. Nick and I are Padawans in training.
That's right.
But regardless, we're not here to talk about Love and Rockets as much as I think we all would want to. We're here to talk about comic books in general. We got so many things to talk about today. We have a very, very special topic as commissioned by one of our wonderful patrons, Danny, that we're going to get into in the second half. But before we get into that, I've got one quick announcement. Something happened a couple weeks back. Me and a bunch of folks got together from the podcast here, and we sat down and we watched Star Wars Episode 1. Paul, Kara, Kate, Lamphere, Tia, and I, and Paul. I don't know if I said everybody. A bunch of us sat down, and we recorded this wild thing. We watched all of Star Wars Episode 1, and we recorded an audio track that you can get today on our Patreon at patreon.com/IRCB podcast. And you can watch Star Wars Episode 1 with our wonderful, fantastic commentary from beginning to end. I'm really, really excited. Mostly because watching back the video after I was editing it and stuff, I was like, this is actually pretty good. So go check that out. If you're not a patron, you should join the Patreon at the $5 plus tier, and you can do that and listen to it and watch the whole video. There's a video component too that's on the Patreon, so you should check it out. But that's my big announcement. It's like 2 hours long. It's fantastic. Paul, Nick, I don't know if you guys had a chance to check it out when I sent the link out, but pretty nice if you ask me.
Nice. I had fun rewatching it. I had not seen that movie since I saw it in the theaters, so it was a fun revisit. Fun question mark way to revisit it.
Yeah. I mean, if you're gonna watch a movie that isn't great but is kind of fun, that's probably the best way to do it with a bunch of friends on the internet. So
of course,
but let's get into things. Let's talk about comic books. Let me ask these two legally mandated questions that I have, and that is, how have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Paul.
Mike, I've been doing well. It's a lovely afternoon here in West Michigan. It's feeling a little bit spring-like, despite the past few days being bitterly cold and a little bit of snow last night. I had a fun weekend. On Friday, I drove to Royal Oak, Michigan to go see the band Sparks live in concert. It was
nice.
Fantastic. I love that band. It was great to see them. It was great to go to a concert again. All masked up, all vaxxed up, very safe, but it was kind of good to go back to a big show like that. It's been a while, obviously, since I'd done anything like that. That being said, I didn't have a ton of time to read a lot of comics this week, so I've been playing catch up on my weekly books. I'm a couple weeks behind, as usual. And part of that is because I've been doing a lot of research, obviously, for A Better Batmobile, the Grant Morrison Batman reread that we will be doing on the Patreon. I think the first episode is going to drop very, very soon. So I've been reading a lot of old Batman comics, and part of that is I'm doing a lot of research into the Silver Age comics that Morrison references in their Batman run, and it leads me down some weird paths sometimes, and because of that, I read World's Finest, number 89, which was published way back in August of 1957. It was written by Edmund Hamilton with art by Dick Sprang and colors by... Our inks by Stan K. Sorry, you can't laugh every time I say Dick Sprang, okay? Sorry.
Listen,
the guy's
we're adults on this podcast, okay?
Yeah. Show some respect.
Jesus Christ.
This is a very strange issue, obviously. It's one of the main story in it is called The Club of Heroes, and it features the International Assembled League of Batmen. If you're familiar with Silver Age Batman, at one point he discovers that there's a bunch of other crime fighters around the world who were inspired by him, and they became crime fighters themselves. You had the Legionary from Rome, El Gaucho from Argentina, the Musketeer from France, and Knight and Squire from England. And in this story, Batman invites all of those characters, as well as Superman, to Metropolis because a millionaire philanthropist by the name of John Mayhew built them their own clubhouse, essentially, a headquarters for this club of heroes to hang out in. And Mayhew says, well, I'll hand the deed to this building over to whoever is the chairman of this club. And of course, they're all so humble. They'll say, well, Superman should be the chairman. Obviously, he's the greatest hero of us all. Superman's so humble. He says, well, how about we have a competition? Whoever has the most extraordinary feat of crime fighting, super whatever, gets to be the chairman of the group. right? So it becomes a competition. And of course, they're all so humble that whatever they do during that week, this competition is going on, they don't tell anybody because they want Superman to be the chairman. However, every time,
very convoluted.
yes, and it's like 11 pages long, and there's a lot happens in 11 pages. Every time Superman is, you'd think Superman would show up, a job for Superman would happen. He's not there, and instead, the strange, mysterious new hero named Lightning Man shows up. Because every time, Clark Kent is about to go do something, he gets very faint and he passes out. Turns out there's a small chunk of kryptonite in orbit, and every time it passes over Metropolis, Superman gets very disoriented. He blacks out, and while he's blacked out, he becomes Lightning Man and shows up and does the thing that Superman would do, and then he wakes up and he can't remember anything. So Batman figures this out. He discovers that Lightning Man is actually Superman when he's blacked out, and everyone decides, okay, well, we'll take care of this kryptonite fragment, solve that problem, and now Superman can be the chairman of the Club of Heroes and have the deed for this mansion in Metropolis where they all hang out. So there you go. It's a happy ending.
Do you know if that has anything to do with Superman's lightning powers that come from the split of the Superman following the death of Superman?
I have no idea, Nick. I just think at one point they show Clark Kent pass out, and he wakes up. He doesn't know he wakes up. He kind of like is in a trance, and he just pulls like window dressing, like a window curtain off the wall, and it's like orange, and he makes his own costume out of it that has a lightning bolt on the front, and they call him Lightning Man because of that. So he had the time at least to do that while he was in this sort of like trance, this sleepwalking type trance caused by the kryptonite. Anyway, it's a very strange story. It's sort of weirdly charming in a DC Silver Age fashion. You know what I mean? Sure. And Dick Sprang is a great artist. He's a fantastic Silver Age artist. It looks really, really lovely. It's very strange. But I love how kind of like low stakes these stories are. Like they're just superheroes hanging out, having a good time. They solve the issue pretty handedly in a few pages. And reading this stuff really makes you realize just like how revolutionary like the Fantastic Four must have been, because this is what superhero comics were. You know what I mean? It's like, it makes sense when you read this, and then you read like the Galactus saga. It's like, yeah, Jack and Stan were on a different level than this stuff. It's obvious why that became so popular. So.
Right. And now it's so funny. Stuff. Yeah. Looking back at these things, we're just like, yeah, the Fantastic Four is really not that crazy, given all of the insane stories that we have now. But like, I could definitely see what you're talking about here. Like if somehow the man who can fly around the entire sun or the entire earth in seconds is being like knocked out by a piece of kryptonite, and Batman has to solve it so that he can get a mansion, like the stakes make no sense here.
No sense. But regardless, I had to read it because John Mayhew gets referenced in Grant Morrison's Batman series. So there you go. That's the tie-in right there. So like I said, my research has taken me down some weird paths, and that's one of them.
I love it.
The other thing I read this week that was newer, thankfully, is Step by Bloody Step #1. This is a new Image miniseries written by Cy Spurrier with art by Mateus Bergara and colors by Matias Lopez. I kind of picked this up on a whim. I've liked other Cy Spurrier books that I've read. I flipped through it in the shop. The artwork is absolutely gorgeous. Some beautiful color work, almost like a watercolor type color palette. Fantastically detailed artwork by Bergara. And as I'm flipping through it, I realized the first few pages are just silent. There's no words or text or anything. And then I sat down to read the whole issue. And it turns out the entire book is quote unquote silent. There's no words, no text, no dialogue. But it is kind of like a sci-fi version of the Iron Giant. The main character is this young girl who's being protected by this giant armored robot who fights monsters in this bizarre landscape that they inhabit. They come across a group of people who seem to be bandits, and it protects the girl. The thing is, the girl has no memory of why this is happening. They have no way of communicating with each other since they don't speak. The only dialogue you get in the book is written in sort of like symbols, like hieroglyphics by other characters. And yet I was totally enthralled by this story. I mean, the artwork is so lovely and does such a good job explaining things, having emotions, having action. It really was a very engrossing, engaging story. I can't wait to see where it goes. It's a 4-issue series. Each issue is like double size, so there's a lot of material here. But it's one of those books that I would always almost recommend waiting for it to be collected, because it feels like a very engrossing, engaging read that you're going to want to sit down and spend time with. So keep your eyes peeled for the collected edition of this, or if you can't wait, pick up the first issue. I thought it was fantastic. I'm normally not a big fantasy guy, but I loved this comic.
Yeah, this is an extremely surprising pick for you, Paul, for this week. If only because I never would have pegged you for someone that could dig this. I think the gimmick of it, and I say gimmick in like a very nice way. Like it's not a shtick. I feel like Cy Spurrier and Matthias Bergara, like they took a big leap with this book in saying, let's do a completely silent series, right? Because I think we all respect and love the one-off Batman issue that has no text, or the one-off X-Men issue that Claremont did that has no text. Like everyone goes like ape shit for that, but to aim an entire series this way is really interesting. And I don't want to say like this is an original thought, like there are plenty of no text graphic novels out there, and there are plenty of other issues that are other books out there that have done this, but I think for a book that's coming out from Image, this feels like a risk in an interesting way. Like Hedra was an amazing book, no text. But this is an entire series that they're trying to tell a full-blown story with. And having read number 2, I think you're going to love this series even more if you continue reading the series. I'm very excited to keep going with it. Yeah. The genre is not a good fit. I don't know what the hell's going on, Paul. If you need help, blink twice,
People are growing, expanding their palette. It's making me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Personal growth all over the place.
Manga.
Yeah, exactly. I've realized that a person cannot survive on Batman comics alone. It's been a tough journey to get to that point, but now I've accepted that. I'm broadening my horizons. No, I like comics that take risks and try to experiment with the art form, and this feels like a good example of that. Like you said, there's other examples of quote unquote silent or textless comics, but this feels like such a complex genre and story to do that with. That's what I found so interesting. And again, like I followed it just fine. Like I never got confused. Like it really told a well-constructed story just through the artwork. So I was really impressed. Very impressed by it.
No, that's awesome. I'm really glad to hear that you enjoyed it, because I was right there with you. Loved it from beginning to end. But yeah, Nick, what about you? How have you been? How have comic books been?
Well, I guess this is going to be like the 11 o'clock news, in that you're going to get the weather at the beginning and then you're going to get the weather again at the end. So everyone just imagine that Paul and I are your two weathermen, and I guess Mike, you're going to do the sports segment this week. So
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So West Michigan Weather Watch. What the hell happened this weekend? It was right around 40 degrees, and it snowed for all of yesterday.
I didn't think that you were actually going to do a full weather report. Okay, good. Continue.
I'm going to deliver on my promises. So, and in that vein, I do expect a full sports segment. So better start looking up those Pistons box scores.
You got it.
So it's interesting that Mike said we're not going to talk about Love and Rockets maybe about 10 minutes ago. Because we actually are going to talk about Love and Rockets. Paul, buckle in.
All right.
So I read half of Maggie the Mechanic for today. About 2 days ago, I thought I was going to be reading all of Maggie the Mechanic by Jaime Hernandez. And I was like, well, this book is 400 pages. That's a lot, but I think I can do this. And then I realized how dense this book is. Oh my goodness. So this book is like all over the place in terms of different story arcs, different subplots, seemingly one-shot experiments.
Yeah.
But it's also all over the place in terms of the level of text density in the book. And also, interestingly, like the detailed nature of the art. There were definitely segments and arcs and stories where the pencils and inking almost started to resemble like a Brian Ballard level of detail.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, gosh, I liked the art before, but this is like way more detailed. And I suppose that all of this just very different variety of content is sort of what's going to happen, I guess, when you're probably culling together all of these different stories written over, years and years. I think when I started the book, it was like stories from 81. And by halfway through the book, it was like already 86, 87. So I don't know if that's just artistic growth or just how much time Jaime had on his hands whenever he was doing a specific story. And of course, I said it feels like it's a real hodgepodge, but I'm sure, again, that's also what happens when you're taking all these different stories, from years and years and years and just smashing them all into the same book. So when you go, well, why does it jump from this to this? I think it's just because it's a chronological arrangement. I don't know. In terms of what this book is about,
well, hold on. I don't think we have time for that.
Yeah.
Just the high level would be that it starts out as this sci-fi story about like a mechanic, and a big emphasis at the beginning is that she's sent off into the jungle with this repair crew to fix this rocket, and a whole bunch of things go south, and it felt like there was some 80s political commentary about governments going on, but I'm not going to wade into that because I don't know about any of that. And
Nick's a big Reagan head over here.
Yeah. I've been reading a lot of Department of Truth. I don't want to talk about 80s politics anymore.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I will say one thing that I found kind of interesting about the art, Paul, was that you've got a lot of characters and figures that are being drawn and depicted in a very realistic, grounded way. But then there's a lot of thought bubbles going on with characters where there's sort of like a cartoony imagery within them.
Yeah.
There's one moment where one of the main characters, Rex Race, is on trial and he doesn't think it's going to go very well. And you see a little thought bubble over his head, and it's like of a cartoon skeleton in a cell, like shackled to the wall. And I was like, oh gosh, that's really interesting. It's like a 30-year-old emoji in a way, kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, what were the hieroglyphics if not OG emojis? I'm kidding. That was a language. Nobody come after me.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting when you realize that Jaime Hernandez, was a huge fan, or is still a huge fan of Archie comics and Dennis the Menace. Like all of the sort of cartooniness in the artwork makes so much more sense.
Well, and that's the other thing I noticed too, is that the book has sort of what I would consider comic strip elements.
Yeah.
There's a moment when I think it's Hope. She becomes the assistant to Rex or whatever, and she's like in love with him or whatever, and he calls her cutie, and then she does that thing you see with cartoon characters where she's like walking on air, she's just so elated about it.
Yeah.
And there's another scene where this dinosaur seems to get along with, I can't remember any of the characters' names anymore, and you see little hearts over its head. And so it's interesting to have these sort of, like I said, cartoony comic strip-esque animated elements juxtaposed with a seemingly realistic, grounded story.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of wrestling in this book. It was really hard to read this book. It's really hard to speak to this book. I would encourage people to still read this book. Yeah. It's just that it's like you're reading through all of Jaime's work, just plowing through it one after the next, and it almost feels like not giving it the air and the context to properly breathe.
Yeah. I would say by the time you get to the end of this volume, when you get to the story titled 100 Rooms, that's when it really becomes what Love and Rockets is now. Like, it becomes less of the sort of sci-fi, influence type stuff. It becomes very much more centered on Maggie and her friendships. And that's really going forward. That's what the book is. It's much more coherent. Not I don't want to say coherent, but much more streamlined story wise. The artwork gets a lot tighter and refined. All over
the place. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it kind of like has a more of a direction. So if you can survive, once you get to 100 Rooms, it's toward the end of this volume. That's really where it becomes what Love and Rockets, is and why it's celebrated. So yeah. So I would encourage you to keep going.
I'll keep going. I said I was going to finish this volume, and it does seem like I got to like the Penny Century stories, and at least it's like moving along at a clip now. It's not like the Rocket in the Jungle story where literally there's no text bubbles. It's all being narrated via letters being sent back home. Yeah. And so it's text block after text block after text block after text block.
Yeah.
And it's a lot.
You're seeing Jaime as an artist and a storyteller sort of evolve into their sort of final form. you know, and it's kind of rough around the edges. But when it clicks, like I said, that I think 100 Rooms is when it clicks, and that's really like where it becomes very special. So,
yeah. So I will have another report on that in the future. So
good.
That's just wanted to put that one out there. I also read A Righteous Thirst for Vengeance #6 by Rick Remender.
Ding, ding, ding. He got it right, guys. Everyone, show's over. Nick got the title of this book correct.
I get it right when I have to talk about the book. When it's off the cuff, it becomes like a search for vengeance, whatever. This is drawn by Andre Lima Arujo, colors by Chris O'Halloran, and letters by Russ Wooten. Even more so than in the past, I realize every time I bring up this book, it's A, this is a great book, you need to read it. B, I really can't talk about this book. And even more so than in the past, both of those points hold true. It's significant to point out that with this issue, it is the first issue of the second arc. It does seem like it's a real departure in terms of tone, action, the timing, the amount of dialogue, the amount of exposition. When Mike and I were talking about it yesterday, he said, yeah, it does seem kind of slow. And I think my response was something like, yeah, it's slow in the sense that driving on the highway is slow after all you've been doing for a year is drag racing, because because that's what issues 1 through 5 were. So everything after that just crawls to a halt, and the issue begins with a little bit of a time jump, and I won't say anything more than that. But the moment that happens, you're like, oh, this is a little different. Like, we're not living moment to moment anymore. Is this going to be a real departure? And with Mark Wahlberg, no. And in that sense, it does slow down. It does have more emotional beats. You do learn a couple things about characters, and you start to wonder if it's one of those, and I think we've all read these, when the arc goals or objectives shift and you start to see that first issue of an arc kind of just be about building a foundation, right? Like, well, we're going to set things up for the next arc. And it's like, well, this issue isn't really that fun or exciting. Yeah, I know, but someone's got to put in the foundation, right? And we have those issues, and they're not fun, but we understand why they're like that. I think this issue manages to strike that balance of being a foundational issue, setting up a roadmap for the next arc. But again, you also have some reveals, you have some emotional beats, you do learn some things, there are a couple twists, and so it sort of is able to walk and chew gum at the same time, which not all foundational issues, I find, are able to pull that off. So, yeah, I mean, Remender did it. I mean, a couple issues back, I kept thinking to myself, when we hit this second arc issue, like, how's the transition to arc 2 going to happen, and what is it going to be? And I'm happy to say I think this book is still solid.
Yeah, I definitely agree. If only because this book has successfully managed to make me not hate it after 5 issues, which is a weird thing to say, but I feel like I've been hoodwinked many times by Rick Remender books, and this book, even with the drastic shift in, I think, speed, I still was really, really engaged. Like, something about the way that first arc is delivered made me feel like this series has a lot of legs to it, and I'm really excited to see where he goes. Like, I'm cautiously trusting that this book is going to be great, and so I'm very excited to see what the next arc is like.
I would really love to know, and maybe this has been discussed, but if I was Remender, I wouldn't be showing my hand on this. If this is excuse me, if this is like carefully, specifically planned as like 2 to 3 arcs, or if this is more open-ended than that.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that people can't, do a massive ongoing and plan it as they go, but this feels very planned at this point.
Sure. I honestly have looked into nothing about this book. I just wait for the issue to come out and then I read it. That's as far as I want to look. Like, I genuinely want to be surprised by this book as much as I can. So, anyways, we could talk about this all day. I'm going to talk about some books that I've read. I'm not going to be on the show next week because I'm closing on a house and I'm doing all the business of cleaning a house before you move into it. I'm going through that this week, and it's a whole thing.
Mike won't be on the show, but if you have access to Home and Garden TV, he'll be on Wednesday at 3 p.m. So right after those two Property Brothers.
Exactly. Anyways, but I did manage to read some comics in my time of stressing. I sat down and read Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Annual 2022 #1. This is written and drawn by Junie Ba. Colors by Rhonda Pattinson. Letters by Sean Lee. I don't read the ongoing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series, but I saw that Junie was going to be on this book, and I was like, okay, picking this book up. I don't care what it is. I'd seen some of their drawings of the Turtles on Twitter before, and I was like, if anybody can draw the Turtles, it's this person. And so I picked it up. And I, not having no idea what was going on in the Turtles, there's an opening paragraph that explains, hey, this is what recently happened. A big shift in the Turtles happened. And this is an issue of the Turtles reflecting on that thing happening. So I don't want to spoil that if you are reading the Turtles series. But I will say that I have never in my entire life read a comic that so perfectly captures a licensed character in my life. There's maybe, and again, I say this hesitantly because I'm always scared to talk about this. There are some Rick and Morty comics that do it well. Kyle Starks grabbed those characters, worked really well with it, and they had a couple of artists on that series that were great. But this
I feel like the Rick and Morty comics are Mike's like stumbling upon like the Playboys in the Woods thing. It's like Mike's like secret that he's like, yeah, it's out there and I know it's there, but I don't really want to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. But this Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles issue is perfect. The way that Junie Ba draws these characters, the tones and voices that he gives them, it hits every single nail on the head. Like, I know Eastman and somebody else are like consulting or whatever, and they're consulting on it, but like this book feels like a fan of the Turtles came in and was able to deliver a perfect issue from beginning to end, from the way that the characters are like they're written, from how they're drawn. Like, Ba captures a perfect look for each of the characters or each of the Turtles that is distinct. And even 100%. In the moment where they all wear, like, they go to this thing and there's a moment where they all put back on their classic red bands, like red scarves bandanas or whatever that they used to wear,
masks.
And it's like, even with those masks on, you can tell which turtle is which, not just from their weapons, but just from the way that they hold themselves. And the other thing I want to shout out about this book is Rhonda Pattinson deserves a coloring award for this book. I like, as much as Junie Ba's art is fantastic, this book would not work without the color work that exists in it. There is a page that, God, if I could, there are so many pages in this book that if I could get a hold of them physically, I would pay stupid amounts of money for them. And Pattinson's color work on those pages is just astounding. Like, there's a wonderful, like, top to bottom, frame by frame drawing of the turtles. They're fighting this monster. Each of the turtles is colored their specific color, but it's done in such a smart way, and like the lettering around it is really, really intelligent. That I was like, this is, if I wanted to explain what the turtles were to somebody, I would just give them this page and they would get it from beginning to end. So yeah, really, really enjoyed this issue. If you just want to read a good turtle story, I think this is perfect. Like, the summary that they give you at the beginning of the issue, just like a small paragraph, is enough for you to get into the issue. And if you're someone like me who knows enough about who the 4 Teenage Mutant Turtles are, you're going to love this issue, and really pulls at your heartstrings and captures everything that makes the Turtles great all in one issue. So got to credit Junie Ba for that, and the whole creative team, because it's just fantastic.
Yeah, I read this too, and Mike pretty much nailed everything right on the head. It is true that it does sort of open with that paragraph, and there is sort of a reveal of a plot point. I wouldn't say that it's real revelatory. I don't think it's something that will surprise people. I would say that maybe if you're current, or not if you're current, you're fine. If you're close to current, or you're like nearly current with this book, I would probably hold off until you're 100% there, because then I guess in that case I would consider this maybe a spoiler. But otherwise, again, it's not the most shocking twist, and plot does not play a major part in this issue, but it's gorgeous, as Mike said, and it was like my biggest takeaway from this book. Junie Ba manages to literally take away the masks, put on the red masks, and bestow upon each of the turtles like a physical look and characteristic that makes each one visually distinctive and characteristic. Even the way that Raphael's mask has like these like angular, sort of like a real aggressive, sharp cuts in it that sort of give it his ethos, I guess you could say. Fantastic book. Artistically, I would be shocked if this is not up for awards. And if it's not up for awards, it's just because of the inherent bias against franchise books.
Yeah, maybe. I for those of you who are hanging out with us in the Discord chat, I posted a clip of a panel that I thought was just amazing. But anyways, yeah, so that book was amazing. I also want to talk about Immortal X-Men #1. This is my pick on the show last week. This is by Kieran Gillen, art by Lucas Wernick, colors by David Curiel, and letters by Clayton Coles. And honestly, like, I don't know what to say. This book ruled. I think I was shouting its praises before it even came out. I trust Kieran Gillen to nail the X-Men. And then after reading his newsletter that came out this past week saying like, hey, when Marvel pitched this book to me like a year ago, they were like, hey, Jonathan's leaving the X books. We want to kind of usher in this new era of the destiny of X after the Destiny character shows back up in the series. And so they wanted him to work on this book, which is about the Quiet Council. And for the record, I couldn't remember it last week, but the Quiet Council currently consists of Professor X, Emma Frost, Destiny, Mystique, Storm, Nightcrawler, Kate Pryde, Colossus, Sebastian Shaw, Exodus, and Mr. Sinister. And if you're not plugged into the X-Men universe, this doesn't matter, and none of it is important. But it's a crazy amount of mix, or it's a crazy mix of villains and heroes, or former villains and former heroes, and kind of in between folks and people you wouldn't expect in leadership positions. So it's such a wonderful issue overall, and it seems that Gillen is going to be taking each issue and putting it into the minds of a different character per issue. So he's going to be like, this first issue is in the head of Mr. Sinister, and the next issue is going to be in the head of another character, which is very exciting. And to have the series start with Mr. Sinister, I think, is very smart, if only because rather than just rehashing things or giving us the dreaded page of text that the X-Men books love to do now, to kind of get you caught up, the entire book is just dotted with Mr. Sinister talking about how smart he is and how much he knows about every character that's in the book. So Mr. Sinister, in being a smarmy piece of shit, actually gets you caught up as to where you should be, and knowing what's happening with each of the characters that are involved. So I thought that was a really clever way to get around this might be your first X-Men book in the new era of X-Men. So like if Paul or Nick, if you guys were to pick this issue up, because I know you're not reading X-Men regularly, right, you might be able to actually get caught up.
Yep.
So this book, it rules, and I totally love it. And I'll leave things there because I feel like, I don't know, every once in a while we get some really good X-Men books, and I think this is going to be one of those top ones, especially given how solid I think a lot of Gillen's other Marvel work has been recently. That dude's on fire right now, so I'm really excited to see where this book goes. But anyways, let's move on, talk about comics that are on the top of our pile, comics that we're looking forward to reading next. Let's just bounce right back over to you, Nick. What are you excited for?
Gosh, there's so many new books coming out this week. I think there's a new volume of Drifting Dragons, a lot of other stuff, really, really solid stuff. This was a tough week to pick, but for me, it's going to be The Rocketeer, The Great Race, #1. Maybe they could have come up with a different name than the Great Rate. I don't.
Well,
okay,
hey, races are car races. Rocketeer. He's a rate, like he flew planes, right? So it makes sense.
Okay. So this is by Stephen Mooney, writing and art. Stephen Mooney is perhaps best known for his original series Half Past Danger and the follow-up Half Past Danger 2, Dead to Reichs, REICHS. Get it? Joke about Nazis. Which also came out from IDW. He also drew several issues of Greg Pak's run on James Bond, amongst other things. What's the summary? Well, ace stunt pilot Cliff Secord has returned from his New York adventure to a West Coast steeped in paranoia over the looming war in Europe. Having finally had enough of his near-death scrapes as the high-flying Rocketeer, the only thing in Cliff's crosshairs is the Great Race, a prestigious winner-takes-all air race that runs from California to France. Perhaps it's finally time to smarten up and fly straight by taking his best girl Betty to Paris, but other parties want to win. Who cares? I'm not even going to finish. I'm not even. No one cares.
What is this? Is this an Archie comic?
No. God. Look, I want to see the helmet. I want to see a big rocket plume from the rocket pack. I want to see a couple Nazis get shot. That's what I want, and I want it to look good. If this book delivers that, that's fine. It is the 40th anniversary of the first appearance of the Rocketeer. I think that's great. The book is also going to come with an oral history featuring Dave Stevens, the original creator of the Rocketeer, his friends, family, and fellow artists all culled together. And it's going to be, all culled together by the director of the forthcoming documentary on the beloved artist. So very, fortuitous, perfect timing, given 40th anniversary. And, who cares about the plot? The Rocketeer has always been about looking good. It's always been about looking good. Yep. Let's not pretend that we care about Rocketeer lore. No one cares.
I think there's people out there that do, but you know what? That's fine. No. We're going to say on this show we don't care about it. Unless, Paul, you disagree.
It's about looking good. Look who's been on this book. Chris Samnee, great looking miniseries. Can I tell you what it was about? No, absolutely not. Darwin Cook, absolutely stellar Rocketeer work. Do I remember the plot? No, who cares? It's about looking good. It's about
what?
Jetpacks.
You're not wrong, Nick. You're not wrong.
Who is this That's person on the show right now? What the fuck is that? Yeah. Oh my god!
I don't care about Rocketeer lore. They're not gonna make me care. I'm just picking this up because I'm shallow.
Wonderful. Okay, Paul. What about you? Can you top the Rocketeer: The Great Race?
I really can't. I really can't top that. So I'll secede my pick. No. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm way behind on my monthly comics, so I have a big stack of stuff waiting for me to read. But I decided to pick something that's coming out this week that will probably make its way up to the top of my pile. Black Widow number 15. Black Widow is one of my favorite current superhero books, which is not something I expected to say, but it's a fantastic, fantastic series. Nice. Written by Kelly Thompson with art by Elena Casagrande. Again, a character that I know very little about. I've read the other recent series that Mark Waid and Chris Samnee did. I really liked that, mainly because of the aesthetics. Like, it's such a good looking book, and I feel this is a similar thing. Casagrande's artwork is absolutely lovely, and her and Kelly Thompson have put together a really interesting story, actually, that involves Natasha putting together a group of heroes or associates, including her sister Yelena and the Winter Soldier. The current story arc involves them tracking down the Living Blade, and this is going to be the issue where we get a big knockdown, drag-out fight between Natasha Romanoff and the Living Blade. And the best thing about this series is, like, every issue, there's going to be at least one big double-page spread that Casagrande does that kind of like is almost like a J.H. Williams III type layout, very dynamic. You get a full big picture, but as you zoom in closer, you see it's like a bunch of action shots strung together in a very engaging way. It's one of those books I just have to spend a lot of time reading because I'm just so taken by the artwork. Nice. It really is one of my favorite superhero books because of that. It's a book that, in terms of story and continuity, much like The Rocketeer, maybe I'm not that invested in, but it just looks lovely. And sometimes you just want comic books that are exciting, action-packed, and just look good. And this is nailing it for me month to month. I really enjoy this series a lot.
Cool.
It's speaking of The Rocketeer and Mark Waid and Chris Samnee, they teamed up on a miniseries called The Rocketeer, The Cargo of Doom. So,
okay. And I read that. Do you remember what The Cargo of Doom was?
No, because it
was dinosaurs.
It was awesome. I'm not trying to make my point here, but I don't even...
It was dinosaurs. Okay.
It was dinosaurs. It was a really good series. Yeah.
I don't know if you're pulling my leg. Is that a joke? Was that really what it was?
Find out. You have to go back and reread it and find out.
Yeah, you have to go back and reread it. We're not going to spoil anything today. Paul, Black Widow 15, though, sounds interesting. I think I read the first volume of this series, and I never went back to it. I remember Casagrande's art being spectacular from beginning to end. So you're selling me on going back and trying to find those trades. If I can get volume 2 or volume 3 or whatever, I think they were all on Hoopla at some point. So maybe I can grab those because I remember liking it.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Again, it's like not the most like exciting or engaging, but like sometimes you just want like fun superhero comics, and that's what it is, and I like it.
Awesome. Very awesome. Well, I guess before I get into my picks, we had some folks hanging out with us today on the Discord, and they sent over what books are on the top of their pile. So our good friend Danny is going to be reading X-Men Red #1. Excuse me. Brian is going to be reading Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the 25th anniversary special. Paul G said they're reading Foul Brood by Chris Sabella. This is the B murder mystery series that you may have seen on Kickstarter. And Hugh is reading Marauders #1. A lot of X books that came out this week. And I have decided that I'm not excited about any of them. With the exception,
excited.
With the exception, I will not engage. With the exception, X-Men Red #1. I am very excited about that, actually. I didn't realize that this was the book that I thought it was. This is Al Ewing on writing with art by Stefano Caselli, colors by Federico Blee, letters by Ariana Maher. Ultimately, my question is, what is Al Ewing going to do on Mars? Because this book is about the X-Men on Mars. The summary is, who can save the Red Planet? The mutants of Araco spent millennia scarred by war, but on what was once called Mars, they are learning to live in peace. Storm, who is, by the way, like the leader of the X-Men and mutants on Mars, knows the Red Planet needs something greater than a queen, but Abigail Brand has other plans along with an unstable Vulcan, aka the third Summers brother, by her side, and Cable keeping his own secrets, the Summers son. So welcome to X-Men Red. It's a new world and someone has to fight for it. Like, this book is going to be wild, if only because Al Ewing doesn't mess around. Like, his sword run was absolutely incredible, and now he's kind of continuing it in space with Abigail Brand and the big revelation of what happened at the end of Sword, which is pretty interesting to me. This story is going to be focusing on Storm, Magneto, and Sunspot, according to the cover, and I am fucking in for that. Like, a story that focuses around Storm and Magneto alone is a book that you're like, can count me in for, and I'm going to be very excited. Like, I was going to read this regardless, but I'm actually excited compared to some of the other X-Men books that are coming out this week. So that's what's on the table for me.
Whenever Mike reads X-Men solicits, like, I have that moment in the back of my brain where I'm like, I know this is English, but
okay.
But why am I not under? But why does it not? Ultimately, it starts to feel like I'm having a stroke, and and I just sort of start to sniff around for the smell of burnt toast because I mean, you never know.
Yeah. Well, I'll make sure to give you a full report on this, Nick, so you can truly feel insane after I read this issue. But we're going to take a quick break, though. When we come back, we're going to be talking about our commissioned episode topic, which is, what are our comic book gripes and how can we fix them? Our comic grievances, I guess. Like, this is our big Seinfeld episode, whatever that thing was that they did at that episode. So we'll be back to talk about that in just a second. This week on I Read Comic Books, we're going to be talking about a commissioned topic from our good friend Danny, who's supporting us on Patreon at our $10 tier. That means he gets to commission an episode, and he decided that we're going to be talking about the airing of our comic grievances and how we fix these things. What are our gripes? What are our pains? I'm going to read this thing that Danny sent over to us as part of this topic discussion. He said, in the interest of bringing a positive attitude, I think for any grievance, brought about the host that we can propose a change or a fix. He's curious to know if we had any special insights. So like Nick and Paul and I, we've all got our own various thoughts about, some of the problems and different issues that we have in comics. So I guess to get things started, I'm going to bring up the one that has been a perpetual problem for anybody. And I'm sure that there are people out there that will disagree with me, but this is my opinion. Okay. Oof. So my thought is one of my issues with comics, I think a lot is comic book crossovers, right? I think we all have a little bit of a bone to pick with comic book crossover events. We're thinking about like our Civil Wars or our, X-Men Battle of the Atoms, or hell, pretty much X-Men X of Swords, the series that they did.
X-Men versus Avengers, right?
Yeah, like all of the X-Men versus it's all the X-Men problems, right? But I think this is bigger. This goes beyond just X-Men. This is like pretty much any major title eventually will hit a point where they end up doing a big crossover event where you have to read a bunch of extra titles that you probably normally wouldn't be pulling. Or if you are pulling all of them, maybe the story just doesn't fit normally. And I really don't want to harp on this because I think we've all talked about it to death on this show. And I'm sure if you're reading comics regularly, you've heard other people talk about this to death. The issue mostly just being, sometimes I don't want to read an extra 6 or 7 books just to get a full story. Like, why can't it just be told in one story? And I mean, Nick, Paul, I don't know if you guys have any thoughts before I get into what my proposed thoughts and the solution would be, but I don't know. How do you guys feel about crossovers?
Yeah, I mean, my short version would be make event books stand alone.
Yeah, this should be optional. You should have to opt into a crossover rather than being sort of forced into it based on the books you're reading. Unless it's sort of like a natural, sort of organic tie-in, but they usually don't feel that way.
Yeah.
My biggest pet peeve is like when they announce, now the trend seems to be, all right, the main crossover is going to be 6 issues. You can just read that. There's also going to be 24 one-shots that somehow tangentially tie in. You know what I mean? That's my bigger pet peeve. Like they've shifted away from like, all right, the entire continuity of the entire product line is going to be infected by this crossover. Instead, you just have a bunch of one-shots that you might be necessary to read to understand the 6-issue story we're telling. And it kind of relates to one of my things I want to point out too, is like when they do that, why don't the collected editions include the tie-ins in terms of the continuity narrative of the story?
Yeah,
like when I pick up a collection of a crossover, I want all the stuff that is apparently important enough to fall under the banner of the crossover to be put in that story in the order that the story makes sense. Not collected at the end or a different collection.
Yeah.
That drives me nuts when you're trying to read a crossover and you can't get all that.
Yeah. I just read War of the Bounty Hunters, and they took all the one-shots and they threw them into their own trade. And as Paul said, this was an event, I believe, curated by Charles Soule. Full credit to him, because I do think he does try to organize these things with a fair level of deliberation. The one-shots were meant to be read, obviously, at certain points relative to the rest of the book, and they just threw it all into one book.
Yeah.
Yep. That's something I've noticed when I was reading the metal crossovers or the death metal crossovers at DC, is like they had all these one-shots and they clearly were supposed to be read at certain times in the story, unless I'm not, come on, who's got time to read the actual checklist that they publish to see, or to read the little editor's note that says these events take place before this issue? I'm just reading my comics, to relax, and I'm buying the physical issues. I don't always notice that stuff right away, and I always get very confused. So
interesting.
Big pet peeve of mine.
Yeah, it's funny because I said in my notes that I think that the solution to big crossover events is to drop all of the non-essential stories into their own one-shots. And I don't mean like miniseries. I mean singular one-shot stories. If you're not involved in the main storyline, you don't need 3 to 6 issues to tell your stupid little side story, right? That's my personal opinion, right? I think mostly I think I'm talking about the situation of if you're reading ongoing, right? So like I read Death of Doctor Strange, which personally felt like a good crossover, right? Like the 6 issues or 5 issues of the core story was everything they need. Like, say what you will about the end of that story, whatever. But I felt like the idea and the structure for the narrative, or for the way that they told the stories, were good. And we got the main storyline. And if you wanted to, you could read these tie-in stories that kind of had something to do with the main story. But if I hadn't read them, and I hadn't read any of them up until some people on the server recommended me a few of them, I didn't feel like I was losing anything. And then when I read those later, I was like, oh, this is just supplemental, but it had nothing to do with the bearing of the main story. Like it gave a little bit of context as to why a character was in a certain place, but like it's fucking comic books, man. Like Wolverine's just going to show up, like Spider-Man's just going to happen to fucking be there. Like it's fine. Like I don't have to know that he was at his Aunt May's and then he ran into MJ who was like, Peter, don't go through that port. Like I don't give a shit. Like he shows up. Okay. So I like that. But the key thing about that is if those stories do need to be read in a certain order, I 100% agree with you. If they're compiled into a collection, they should be published in reading order, because those checklists that they give you in those single issues, in my mind, are super crucial. Like if you don't, if you're publishing an event nowadays, and I think most of the big publishers are doing this, like if you don't give me a checklist as to what I need to read and in what order, like why would I even try? Why would I even give a shit? And there's another layer to this that goes up beyond just the reading experience, but from the local comic book shop experience. Like I've only heard terrible things about these event like books in general where like there are all these one shots and like there's the main story. So if I walk into my shop and say, hey, pull Death of Doctor Strange, my shop doesn't know that I also want the dozen one shots. And as a reader who like, you want me to fucking pour through the Diamond previews list and like give you all the books that I want for this event that are going to be one-offs that maybe I don't even know about, or like how many people are actually going to the Diamond book to actually get all their books? Maybe Paul, Nick, you guys are, you were at one point, but like 90% of people, are they doing that are reading comics? Or do they just say, hey, I read all Doctor Strange, give me all the Doctor Strange books? And then the shop has to go, do I want to give them these extra 8 books?
Right.
Because they are part of the event, but they aren't Doctor Strange books, right? These are the problems. And I think like it's a huge, it's not a huge gripe, but like it is frustrating to be in those situations, which kind of begs the question of like, if you wanted to tell me a 15-issue story, then just say that the arc is 15 issues and include them all and then collect them all in that order. Like, why are we, what are we doing here? Like, what are we actually doing here by adding all these extra little side stories other than just trying to get more books in people's hands?
And I try to stay above the fray with a lot of that bullshit by reading it in trade format. And so, I definitely, if I'm showing up to read this after the fact and I'm not trying to follow a monthly checklist and I'm probably paying a little bit extra to be reading it in trade, I do expect you to offer me a curated reading experience where everything's in order. And it feels like maybe 10 years ago, this used to be the norm. Like it used to be in the right order, but maybe they were worried now that people are going to get confused.
Well, if there isn't a clear demarcation between like, hey, you're reading the main storyline and this is a one shot, like I definitely can see that because art changes, writing style changes, focus changes, all that stuff. But I interrupted you, Paul. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, in that case, you just have to wait for the absolute edition, right, Nick?
Right.
Because eventually at one point they'll collect it again.
Yeah.
Because I noticed they did that. And it depends on the crossover itself. Because I know when they've done the Final Crisis collections, they've included the one shots that are part of the main story, and they usually put them in the book where they take place in the story. So it really comes down to whoever's editing the collection. And I just wish it was uniform, across the way, because it would make reading this stuff more appealing. Like if I wanted to read, I don't know why, if I wanted to read like an X-Men Avengers crossover, like I wouldn't know where to start. Like I would need someone to kind of do it for me, do the curation for me. And I just don't feel that always happens. So,
right. Yeah. I guess like to not just continue down this negative pit because Danny in the chat is just spamming chaos gifts. I think that like our solution here for this, because I do want to get to other points, is a reading list is required, right? Like that should be your first opening page. Here's everything that you're going to read. Here's the order that you're going to read it in. And here are all the credits for that. Like I know, Paul, this is another thing we can talk about it in a bit, but like here are all the credits. Here's the issues that are included. And here's everything. Like if you're getting just the main storyline, there should also be a page that's like, by the way, there's this other book that contains all the side stories, but you're just getting the main story. And I think that, the real solution to me is like, don't publish all these side stories. If these side stories are crucial to the plot, make them part of the main storyline.
Right.
Like,
it almost feels like a hedging of the bets. Right.
Right.
That's really what it is.
Well, Marvel and DC know that 12-issue events sell, right? They've been doing them for years. So just accelerate not accelerate the pace of publishing of the main story, but like put these side issues in between, publishing at the same time, but make them part of the main storyline. We know that you can do a week-to-week Batman book for 12 weeks straight. We know you can do a 3-month on or 3-week on, 1 week off Spider-Man story. Like, why not do that for the event? If you're planning this stuff far enough in advance, like just do that. And I think that will create a better reading experience and enjoyment for readers. So,
or if you want to go real wild, you could go oversized issues, have B stories at the back, maybe condense them a little bit more than they currently are, and turn these one-shots into slightly smaller B stories in oversized main issues.
Yeah. All of this would make things less chaotic, I think, for both physical and digital and collected readers, like, all at once. It's all just a matter of, like, informing your readers that these are the way that we're... Because, like, if we're not going to move to the model of just telling straightforward stories... and instead we're going to keep this chaotic world of like, well, there's going to be this main storyline, but then 15 other side storyline. Like, they've got to do something to like make things less confusing. So anyways, let's wrap up on that one. Sure. Move on. I guess Nick, or let's jump over to you, Paul. What's one of your pet peeves or one of your grievances here?
This is something, and it seems very like nitpicky, and admittedly probably is, but it's something I've noticed recently when I'm reading trade collections, trade paperbacks, or collected editions of ongoing series, and they edit the comics where they basically remove the title page and the credits from the page which they occur.
Yes.
And for the collected edition. And it always bugs me because you can see that there's a big open space on the page where there's nothing, or there's very little like.
Sometimes they don't even tell you you're in a new issue.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They just start.
My goodness. Yeah. That's my biggest pet peeve. I'm someone who really enjoys reading physical single issues. I'm used to the rhythm and pace of a 22-page comic book story, so I can see them happening in the collection, but I like seeing the cover, and I like seeing the credits, and I like seeing the title, because it's all part of the reading experience for me. And when you take that out, sometimes, it is confusing when a story ends and begins. When an issue, you can kind of tell based on the rhythm of the storytelling, but to actually have that conclusive, you have been reading, this is the title of the issue, by so-and-so, so-and-so. So, like, I like having all that stuff as part of the reading experience. And again, it is noticeable because sometimes you're just looking at the page like, why did the artist just stop drawing at the bottom of this page? Like, oh, you just took out what was there. It's so frustrating to me. And again, it feels nitpicky, but I like the experience of reading comics issues as a chapter, as a statement in and of themselves. And without that, it kind of just feels, it's just, a collection of stories without that sort of rhythmic chapter type, distinction.
Yeah, you don't have the sort of beats that you would normally have if you were going through a full issue. You just don't. It just it's so bad.
It's especially frustrating because I think that in the world of prose, right? Like the end of a chapter is usually ended with like some kind of cliffhanger, the same way that an end of a single issue on an ongoing series can end in a cliffhanger and typically does. Yeah. The thing is that in a prose book, you usually have like a page turn or a chapter head marker or something that like really indicates that like this is the end of a chapter, and we're actually giving you like a cliffhanger. And in comics, that like that actual placement of this was presented by or written by so and so and so and so, like that kind of denotes the end of chapter, and that the hook that you're feeling as the reader is meant to be the stopping point of that contained chapter. And when you read books, because I've read trades where like they got rid of all that stuff and you feel like, oh man, there's suspense building, and then you turn the page and the suspense is immediately relieved. It feels like bad writing, but it's not, because if you take it out of the context of the collected edition, that's actually great suspense that then gets paid off a month later. And while you're still going to be reading the book with that text and stuff like that in there, you at least, if they insert the title, or excuse me, the cover of the next issue before you get into this, break of the suspense, you feel that tension while you're reading a collected edition still. And by removing that stuff, it totally removes all of the drama that I think you get from reading these serialized type stories.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's true that the way writers and creators will craft a 22-page issue versus a 150-page OGN, it's a very different writing style, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. And again, that's always been a pet peeve of mine, the way they do that. I think, and there's been a lot of miniseries. Sometimes I'm reading a miniseries, like, why wasn't this just a single volume? So I think because especially Marvel, DC, and Image are so geared toward monthly comic book readers, it's like, it's okay to just publish a 100-page OGN. Just do it. If that's what the story is, let it be that. You know what I mean? So that's too many thoughts there at the same time. But my biggest thing is when I'm reading a collected edition, I want to see the original title page that the letterer did for that issue published there in the collection.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like an easy solution. How do we run this up the chain at all the various publishers and stuff? And it's funny though, because I don't think that this is just a Marvel and DC problem. I think that you probably will see this at Boom. And I think it varies on the book. It all depends on the editor. It all depends on who's working on the book and design it and crafting it and stuff like that. I would love to have Kate Lamphere on the show because she does work like this, not for comics, but in a different world, like in the same kind of fashion of compiling and designing books. So there's probably a lot of thought process behind it. I would just love to pick someone's brain about why they would make those types of choices, because it can be very jarring for the reader. But solution, just keep that shit in. We really like it. We love the artifacts.
Very briefly. I'm sorry. Very briefly, I want to say I have the absolute edition of Batman Year One, which is obviously one of my favorite Batman stories. I've read the comic so many times. But if you get the absolute edition, if you pay $100 for the big oversized hardcover edition, right, it's published in 2 volumes. The first volume is the version that they published as a trade collection that I've read. But the second collection, the second volume of it, they actually just reprinted the issues basically page by page without the advertisements, but it's on newsprint. They have the original covers with the trade, with the actual, trade cover dressing on it, all that, the little box with the issue number and the price. And they also reprint the letters columns from those issues. So it's an incredibly different reading experience. Like, you're actually reading it as it was published month to month, and it completely changes the rhythm of the story. It's really fascinating. So I'd love to see collections do more of that stuff, where you really kind of reproduce the actual issues as they stand, so you get more of that experience of reading it month to month.
Mm-hmm. And then after all of that, Frank Miller calls you up and thanks you for your purchase, and you try to get him off the phone before he reaches into some other topics that are a little more controversial.
Yeah.
Speaking of controversial, Nick. So I think we've come to the conclusion on Paul's point here, at least to a certain extent. I'd be curious to know if listeners out there have different opinions on this, because I feel like there is no one solution. But I agree, like these artifacts are important, and I would prefer them over not having them. But Nick, let's dig into one of your points, because I feel like everything that you have is controversial.
Really?
No, I'm kidding.
Okay.
I'm kidding.
All right.
I'm trying to spark some drama here. Come on.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I forget. We have to get into that keeping up with the Kardashians mindset.
Yes.
Everything's got to be elevated, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, this is a little niche, but as a digital reader, largely digital reader, can I just be told when content is leaving a service? I realize that this doesn't happen as much anymore. Disney Plus, for example, is pretty much only ever adding content. There's no removal anymore. Netflix is all Netflix originals because they don't want to see things leave anymore. I'm sure we all remember the great Office departure from a couple years ago, when people weren't sure where they were going to find their next 7 out of 10 sometimes funny show that they could just put on in the background and mute it for hours on end. So I'm just going to make friends here. I'm not, you know what? I'm just going to make friends. And we're going to go after The Office. So that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So you don't see as much of this anymore, but when we're talking about something like Comixology, obviously they do have their own original line. We've probably all heard of it. It's called Comixology Originals. But unlike Netflix or Disney Plus, they don't really have the luxury, nor will they ever probably reach a point where, they have full control over all of their content. They're just dealing with a lot of content from other people, and they're sort of at the whim of what those publishers want to do. You certainly don't see this as much with comics as you do with like TV, but I would just love a warning when something is afoot. So, and you sometimes see things like this. I mean, Mike, I think I pointed this out to you a couple of weeks ago. There was like a really big G.I. Joe sale on Comixology. And I said, like, I think I know what this is about, because as some of us know, G.I. Joe and Transformers are leaving IDW, and I know it has some complicated shit to do with how Hasbro is reorganizing the company.
Yeah.
But, nobody has really said anything, at least in terms of like Comixology or anything else. If you've read some articles on other comic book websites, you're probably privy and you can connect the dots and figure out what's going on. And namely, that would be the fact that at some point, that stuff's just going to disappear from Comixology. For how long? Who knows?
Well, yeah, okay. Anyway, I know you have more points to this, so I won't interrupt you. So
I mean, and if people are like, okay, Nick, come up with another example. Of course I did. Like, what do you think I did yesterday? Go outside? God. No.
Nick was just saying the weather's not great, so.
It's not great. Yeah. I'm going to stay inside and complain about inconsequential things. We've also seen this with the Alien franchise, right? Obviously, not unlike Star Wars, where it was originally Marvel, went to Dark Horse. Marvel took back what was originally theirs. With the Alien franchise, it was never in the hands of Marvel. It was with Dark Horse. Disney acquired 20th Century Fox, and along with that came the Aliens franchise. And along with that, sort of unceremoniously at one point, all of the Dark Horse non-crossover Aliens books just went and disappeared from Comixology. And I think they also just flat out disappeared, not just Comixology. I think they're also offered on the Dark Horse website and maybe one or two other distributors, and they just disappeared. And since then, a large amount of Aliens books you can't buy. Like, I've recommended Dead Orbit by James Stokoe to multiple people, and yet you can't purchase it. And that just blows my mind that in the year of 2022, in this digital landscape that we now live in, like, books are quote unquote out of print, and you can't can't buy that. That just seems wild to me.
Digital books going out of print it makes no sense at all. Like, from a consumer standpoint, like, I'm sure that there's licensing and, people, lawyers.
I'm sure it makes total sense from that standpoint. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But like, as a consumer, like, it especially books that are so recent, right? Like Dead Orbit being the craziest book to not have in print, given I feel like how popular and how praised that book is. The fact that maybe we're wrong, someone please correct us if we are wrong, and you can buy it now somewhere we just aren't aware. But like, I think you were recommending it to someone on the server recently. They were just like, the only way I can get this is physically, and I have to like buy it from the United States because it's not even in print anymore. Like, it's crazy to think that these are the links that we have to go to read comics that were at one point on sale digitally with no problem, and all because of weird licensing agreements. Like, why is this not something that can be easily mitigated? And I'm sure that there's more complicated things in view there, but like, that we're just not aware of. But it still blows my mind. I'm right there with you. Like, this is such a strange thing. And I guess to get to the solution point of this conversation, like, I guess, Nick, what are your thoughts on this? Or Paul, maybe you have some thoughts on what a solution could be to this.
Well, I mean, the one thing I'll just briefly say, which is kind of weird because it's almost like Marvel has the solution and they chose not to embrace it. And again, this is like a Nick White read between the lines, tinfoil hat, copyright 2020 investigation. So,
sure, like, you have no insight on this. This is just guesswork.
Exactly. This is what I have parsed, right? When you look at how Marvel handled taking Star Wars back, right? Literally a week or two before Star Wars #1 in 2015 came out from Marvel, they dumped all of the Dark Horse stuff onto Comixology. And they branded it all with a big Marvel sticker. You can go look at it. It looks exactly like the Dark Horse trade. Excuse me. It looks exactly like the Dark Horse trades and layouts. They just stamped it with a Marvel sticker, and they threw a Legends banner across the front because it's no longer canon, right?
Yeah.
And they just did this to all of the content, but they didn't do anything else. I think maybe they put in like their little credits page with the Marvel corporate board of people, right? Because you have to do that. But that was it. And everything just showed up and you had it. And yet with Alien, and I get it, like, Alien does not operate anywhere in the same sort of colossal orbit of popularity that Star Wars has. It's just totally on a completely different level. And I acknowledge that. But there were people in like January and February of 2021 that were saying, I can't buy this Alien book. What's going on? Marvel seems to be taking the same approach that they did with Star Wars, aka, repackaging, rebranding, and then rolling it out. But they're doing it so slowly. It's just wild. It's like one comic arc a month or something like that. And so,
if they give them all of them, if you get all of them, no, Nick, you won't be tempted to buy them one at a time, though. This is just marketing.
If you gave them to me all at once, I would just have to buy them all at once, right? I don't. That's not a problem. So, like, they're rolling them out with these new covers, and it looks like they're doing it chronologically. So people are like, "Oh, I want to read Dead Orbit," and I'm like, "Well, that's cool." Marvel's rolling out like Alien comics from 1993 right now, so go grab a Capri Sun and you'll feel like you're on the same page. So again, I know this is very niche, but like it's
right. But as properties transfer owners and stuff like that, like, are we going to see more of this over time? Right. Like, I was reading an article. I was just Googled the whole Transformers thing, and I was like, there, Transformers is in talks with Skybound to be published by them.
Oh,
like,
that's
what's going
right.
to happen? What's going to happen with all those IDW comics? Like, do I have to go buy More Than Meets the Eye right now so that I can make sure that I get it? Is Image going to republish all of those books? Like, that's a huge question. I mean,
or
I
if
think
you end up with some books that end up in a weird legal limbo where nobody feels they can publish it.
Exactly.
That's the real fucky stuff.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I had a recent experience somewhat similar to that where I was trying to read Astro City on Hoopla.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, I know where this is going.
3 trades left in my reading, and then all of a sudden, all they just disappeared from Hoopla. And I understand, like, I don't use comics houses that much. I rely on Hoopla. So if something's not on there, I'm very hesitant to go buy it somewhere else. Like, I like to use Hoopla, use my local library to read all that stuff. Right. And then I just saw that because that's a series that was published over like 3 different publishers over its existence, and like there's different volumes and different miniseries that are part of it. It looks like Image got the rights back again, which is probably why it disappeared off Hoopla. And now Image is publishing a collection of the first 3 years of Astro City that's coming out this week. So it's like the ability to kind of navigate that stuff, if you're not a deep fan who's tracking who owns what, it's very confusing. And it's like, I want to finish reading Astro City. I'm not sure how to get my hands on it the most convenient way for me.
Yeah. It's weird because I think like our solution here is like a very, very, very consumer based solution here, in that just fucking let me read it. I will pay for it, and I will find any, or I will go through any legal means I need to read this thing. Just let me read it. If I got to pay for it, if I got to pay for a subscription, if I've got to, purchase the CBR or the PDF from someone, like, I'll do it. I think the problem is that, like, the availability is all just about the, Brian posted the perfect GIF in the chat, which is, that's capitalism. It's a problem of just people wanting to get their money, and they're asking for fucking pennies for these comics that are 20, 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old, just because they want to be the ones that get the money for it. And like, sure, but like, why is this so complicated? Why does it have to be so complicated? If the goal is to get money in hand, then let me pay you for the thing. Let me just pay you for it. Like, what do we have? What kind of hoops do we have to actually jump through here? And I'm sure that this could spiral back up into like a problem with like copyright, and the problem that Disney has like basically ruined copyright in the United States, and yada yada yada. And like, I'm totally aware of that, but from a basic consumer standpoint, don't make this hard, and I will give you money for it. I promise.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't 2002. Like, I want to give you money. I don't want to have to go on LimeWire and accidentally download a Weird Al parody again when I want like the original song. Okay,
Nick is downloading aliens-_dead://orbit.exe to read on his computer.
Yeah, and I'm gonna end up with like Alien Ant Farm Smooth Criminal instead, and
right. But they like, it's an edited version that has like, instead of the Michael Jackson scream, it's like the sound of the alien mom scream or mother screaming.
Yeah, and it's like 42K kbps bit rate. It's gonna be good.
Sounds like you're listening to it over AM radio.
Yeah, and if we can't resolve all of the like copyright convoluted stuff, and again, it's like, it's not Comixology's fault. Obviously, they're not the publishers that are arguing with each other or shifting properties. They're just the ones putting out the content, and I get that. They're they're the messenger, and I'm not going to shoot the messenger in this case, but even if we can't get the content, like, I would just appreciate, and maybe the publishers don't want to do this, maybe that's part of it, but like, just give me a heads up. Like, I get it that Netflix just gives you a month, and yeah, that didn't help me when I was halfway through season 3 of trying to watch all of the X-Files, and they gave me a month to watch 9 seasons, and I briefly considered it for about 30 seconds, and then roughly did the math on how many episodes per day that was going to be. And I said,
how much PTO you have available to you. And stuff.
One cannot watch that much X-Files. So I get that, but just even a warning. I mean, just maybe even like title the sale like last alert, and then put like a little pair of siren gifs on either side of it, just so I you know?
Yeah.
And it's not GIF. We're not having this debate. It's not.
Oh boy.
So,
anyways, yeah. Well, that's a very complicated issue, but I do think that the simplest solution would be like just a heads up, right? I totally agree with that.
Absolutely.
I don't know. I have other things. Is there any huge things that we haven't talked about yet? Because I realize this episode's going to go on for forever.
Yeah.
We could definitely do this for a long time. But is there any burning gripes?
I feel like there's one we all kind of have in common based on the notes here that maybe we kind of just talk about it together, is the idea that the few times I do try to read comics digitally, or when I was trying to put together the reading list for a better Batmobile, the ability to actually craft like a playlist of comics on a digital reading app would be the greatest thing. We can actually just say like, here's all the issues I'm going to read, you know, in the order I want to read them in, and I can just go and not have to search them down one by one like I normally have to do. So
here's the craziest thing about this is like, I worked at Comixology for 4 years. I pitched this idea in 2017, I think. And like, there just wasn't enough buy-in for it because like, it's a complicated-ish process. Comixology at the time had I had the ability to do it. And so like, when I stopped working there, like I built the Chrome extension that allowed you to do this on the old Comixology site. Like, you could basically queue up things, and Danny and Hugh on the server, thank you for testing it. They played around with it. I don't know how often they used it, but like I had built this thing where you basically could just queue up comics that you had in your library, and then you could go into the web reader for Comixology and you click next you get to the end of a comic, and it would say, hey, do you want to read the next in this series, or do you want to read the next item in your queue? And you click next in queue, and it would take you to that comic. And like, that was it. It was set up so that you could just read all those books. It was amazing. And I don't know why someone hasn't invented this, like for other comic readers, like even things like Panels or Chunky or all these apps that are out that allow you to read, you know, legal PDFs and CBZs. Like, why don't they have this? Like, I want to queue up these 9 books to read in an order. Like on Wednesday, the worst thing that I have to do as a digital reader is I have to go back, finish a book, and then I have to go back to my library, find the next book that I want to read, start it. And then when I'm done, I have to go back and find the next. And then like, it's not like it's backbreaking. It's not like it's destroying me or it's blah, 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 but it's just a friction that I wish that I didn't have to have. And like, if all my books are already there and they're ready to go, like, why can't I just queue them up and make a playlist to start reading those books? And I think like for the better Batmobile, like to have Hoopla have this would be amazing, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So if there is interest in this, I mean, one day if I'm feeling really cheeky, maybe I could build something for the current Amazon web reader, which is not great, but like, maybe I could build something like that to do that, because it's just books and links and stuff like that, easy enough. Like, who knows? Or maybe they'll build it themselves.
Again, like, I don't read a lot of digital comics this way, but I have heard that this is an option that you can do on the DC Comics, DC Universe Unlimited, whatever it's called, DC's digital service. And I can't verify that, so don't take it take it with a grain of salt, because I've not tested it. But if they're able to do that, like, why couldn't Comixology, the biggest, you know, hub for digital comics? So
the
just strange it's not like industry wide.
It's just they gotta find people that are invested, and they have to find a business need for it, right? Like, the thing that I think we always forget as comic readers, and we forget as consumers sometimes, is that like, that we are just people who read these things, but like, if a thing doesn't make someone money, they don't want to build it. Like, and the argument is there, and I've made this argument myself, and I've heard other people make this argument to success and to failure, that if you make the thing really good, it makes people more likely to spend money on your platform, right?
Yep.
And so adding these types of features, while they aren't immediate money makers, they are the type of things that go, man, this thing's so polished, how could I not use it? You know? Yeah, I mean, you think of any application or any piece of software that you use, what are the ones that you prefer to use the most? Like the ones that are easy to use, even if they aren't doing all the things that you want and they're frictionless, or the ones that do everything that you want, but they are clunky as shit, right? Like, do you get frustrated with your piece of software, even if it does everything that you want it to do? I don't know. This is not related to comics, but like, I 100% see what you're saying is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Solution is to just write into your app of choice, or to Comixology or to Amazon or whatever, and say, hey, I want this. It would really make my life easier. And that's what I want. These companies, tout themselves as customer focused and they want to do everything to benefit their customers. Like, this is a perfect example of that. And I think if you can justify it, with a well-worded email or something, enough people start to ask for it, maybe it's something that ends up on a roadmap, but it's tough. So,
yeah.
Anyways, I'll get off my soapbox this week again, and come to our next hangout where I will rant and rave more about this type of stuff. But yeah, I guess to wrap up this episode, thank you guys for putting together your list of gripes. Danny, I hope that we were able to solve some things for you, or at least give our potential solutions. And it'll be really curious to know what everybody else thinks. We have some other things in our show notes that are going to go on the Patreon, as we usually do every week with the show. But thanks guys for recording this. Any last thoughts, quick thoughts before we wrap up here? Nick?
Yeah, sure. This will be my other quick gripe, which is a massive, could be a 10-part series, maybe in the future. But hey, everyone, let's just get together and stop modern comic book speculation.
Oh, hold on. All right, no, we're cutting the episode there. I'm not... Oh boy. Okay, that's a whole episode in itself, and we'll have to get someone from a local comic shop to come on to talk about that, because I think we know someone, and I think that would be really fun. All right, I'm going to cut you off there, Paul. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
This unpopular opinion, but please, let's just bring back legacy numbering. Do we need to have a new number one every time the creative team changes? I'm looking at you, Marvel.
Oh,
it's fine.
Right.
People can deal with it. It's fine.
Okay, listen, you guys are trying to open fucking cans of worms as I'm trying to wrap up the show. Next week's topic, I'm going to be gone, like I said. Paul, Kate, and Kara are going to be running things, talking comics and whatnot. I'm excited to listen to this episode, so make sure you show up live on the Discord or listen to the episode next week. It's going to be great. As always, you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow Paul at Oh Hi Paul. You can follow Nick at Death Star Plans. You can follow me at Mike Rapin, and the show at IRCB Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Renee's been doing some stuff on our TikTok that's really, really fun, so make sure you check us out over there.
This episode first aired on Patreon and was made possible by the support of our wonderful patrons. You can join today for exclusive series like the IRCB Movie Club, Saga of Saga, and the upcoming A Better Batmobile. You can do that by going to patreon.com/IRCB podcast.
And if you haven't already, please rate and review our show. 5 stars would be great, whether that's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts, because we deserve it.
And join the IRCB Discord community to chat about comics and pretty much anything else. And you can listen to the shows live as we record them each and every week. Check the link to our Discord in the show notes.
Podcasts grow best when spread by word of mouth, so why not tell your friends, family, and local comic shop about IRCB?
Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of our music, and we can't thank them enough for just consistently being a great band. Zander's a very cool guy who makes us sound fantastic every week. We can't thank him enough for editing the show and putting up with our screaming and yelling, especially mine, every week. I want to say thank you to Paul and Nick for being on this episode with me. Thank you to everyone who hung out with us in the Discord, and a special absolute high five across the internet, all the way from where I am to you, to Danny, for making this episode happen. We really, really appreciate your support of the show on Patreon, and thank you so much for commissioning this. We're going to do a part 2, I think. It's not going to be part of the commission thing. So thank you so much for bringing this to us, because I thought this was a really great discussion today. Thank you to everyone out there who listens to the show, and thank you to all the people on the internet who are just fantastic human beings. So until next time, comics are good, and so are you.